Welcome to ECO202. This is study session 9. Main schools of economic thought. Introduction. The development of economics as a discipline has passed through several stages, from the mercantilists to the physiocrats to the classical economists, from Marxists to Keynesians and to monetarists. All these groups have influenced development in the discipline. He will explore these stages alongside the contributions of some reputable economists such as Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Karl Marx, G.M. Keynes. In this study session, their ideas molded the discipline as we have it today. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to explain the stages of history of economic thought vis-a-vis pre-classical school, classical school, Marxian economy, Keynesian economy, monetarist school. Discuss the current developments in the field of economics. Overview of pre-classical school. The classical school represent the first serious school of economic thought. Prior to them, there have been some primitive schools of thought, such as mercantilists and physiocrats. The mercantilists. These were leading businessmen in their times. They were interested in a strong nation with vast army that could be able to protect their foreign business transactions. They were led by J. Child. The mercantilists longed for specie, that is a precious method which they believed could only be obtained through international trade. This school also favored government intervention in the economy. The physiocrats. The physiocrats were based in France, and they were a shade more advanced than the mercantilists. They believed in the natural order, that is, everything has been ordained by God. The physiocrats gave us the idea of surplus value, which they believed could only be obtained from the agricultural sector. The major contribution of the physiocrat to economic thought is the idea of the circular flow of income. The circular flow income owes its origin to Dr. F. Kwasniari, who was also the leader of the physiocrats. They advocated for laissez-faire, that is, free enterprise and minimum government intervention in the economy. Classical school. The classical school can be subdivided into two. The first is the traditional classics consisting of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Rebbe Matters, J.S. Mill, etc. The second group consisted of the modern classics, or what is sometimes called a neoclassicist. Economists in this group include Alfred Marshall, Alwyn Fisher, A.C. Pigo, etc. This later school refined and built upon the main ideas of the traditional classics. B. The two cornerstones of the classic school are the Say's law of market and the quantity theory of money. The classics believed in the existence of full employment in the economy, and a situation of less than full employment was regarded as abnormal. Pigo maintained that unemployment results from the rigidity of the wage structure and interference in the working of free market system in the form of trade union legislation, minimum wage legislation, etc. The classical analysis was based on the Say's law of market, that supply creates its own demand. The classics thus ruled out the possibility of overproduction. This position was, however, attacked by Keynes, who proposed the opposite view, that demand creates its own supply. Unemployment results from the deficiency of effective demand because people do not spend the whole of their income on consumption. The classes also believed that savings and investment are always equal. According to them, savings and investment are functions of rate of interest. Any temporary difference between the two can be corrected through the mechanism of interest rate. For instance, when the rate of interest rate rises, savings rises and investment decline, and this adjustment continues until the two are equal. Keynes again attacked the classical position. He argued that intended savings hardly equal intended investment, since both processes are undertaken by different groups of people. While households make savings decisions, investment decisions are made by the firms. The classes emphasized the importance of savings or thrift in capital formation for economic growth. They believed that the more the savings of the people, the greater the capital formation, and hence the faster the pace of economic growth. To Keynes, however, savings was a private virtue and public vice. According to him, increases in savings reduce consumption, leading to a fall in effective demand and therefore a slump in the employment level. The classes artificially divided the economy into two: the monetary sector and the real sector. The monetary sector only helps in determining prices, while production and consumption decisions are made in the real sector. The above classicalist position was demonstrated via the quantity theory of money. The quantity theory, as formulated by Erwin Fisher, shows a proportional relationship between changes in money supply and changes in the price level. In the words of Fisher, other things remaining unchanged, as the quantity of money in circulation increases, the price level also increases in direct proportion and the value of money decreases and vice versa. The classes emphasized the transactions demand for money, and hence the demand for money in the economy depends upon the value of transaction undertaken in the economy. Classical economics was based on the laissez-faire policy of self-adjusting economic system with no government intervention. The government involvement in the economy should be limited to maintenance of law and order, justice, and provision of social infrastructure. According to them, the invincible hand will allocate goods and services in the economy unhindered. The classical economics was a microeconomic analysis which the orthodox economists tried to apply to the economy as a whole. On the other hand, Keynes, however, had adopted the macro approach to economic problems. Marxian economy. The Marxian economy is based on the teaching and doctrines of Karl Marx, 1818 to 1883. Karl Marx wrote his celebrated book, Das Kapital, in which he exposes his doctrines. Marx contributed to the theory of economic development in three respects, namely, in the broad respect of providing an economic interpretation of history, in the narrow respect of specifying the motivating forces of capital development, and in the final respect of suggesting an alternative path to planned economic development. In interpreting history, he made use of the principle of dialectical materialism. He viewed historical events as the result of continuous struggle between different classes and the groups in the society. The main cause of this struggle is the conflict between the mode of production and the underlying relations of production. The mode of production refers to a particular arrangement of production in a society that determines the entire social, political, and religious way of living. The relation of production relates to the class structure in the society. Marx uses his theory of surplus value as the economic basis of this theory. According to him, capitalism is divided into two great classes: the workers, who own nothing but their labor power, and the capitalists, who own the means of production. The capitalists purchase labor power as its own value, which is the amount necessary for the maintenance of labor. According to Marx, the value of the commodities necessary for the sustenance of labor is never equal to the value of the produce of that labor. If a laborer works for 10 hours per day, but it takes 6 hours to produce goods to cover his subsistence, he will be paid wages equal to 6 hours labor. The difference worth 4 hours labor goes into the capitalist pocket in the form of net profit, rent, and interest. Marx called this unpaid work surplus value. The capitalists appropriate the surplus value produced by labor and then reconvert it into capital, since profits are determined by the amount of capital. The goal of the capitalist, therefore, is to accumulate and accumulate capital. The increasing accumulation of capital, however, forces the capitalist to introduce cost-saving techniques like replacing labor with machine. This leads to the growth of industrial reserve army of the unemployed on the one hand, and a reduction of the surplus value on the other hand, since surplus value is generated by labor on what he called variable capital. This leads to what Marx refers to as a tendency for the falling rate of profit. The reduction in labor employed leads to overproduction and underconsumption in the economy. This further exacerbates the falling rate of profit problem. A capitalist crisis has begun. In each period of the crisis, the stronger capitalist expropriates the weaker capitalist, and along with it grow the mystery of the working class. It is this centralization of capital on one hand and the growing mystery of the workers on the other hand that finally provided the death knell of capitalist system and provided the impetus for the capitalism transformation to socialism. Poverty will disappear and the dictatorship of the proletariat will be established. Marx's prediction about capitalism has failed to come into being. There is no increasing mystery of labor in the advanced capitalist societies as asserted by Marx, and the technological development has not increased the industrial reserve army. Despite the fact that much of his predictions have not come to pass, Marx has made useful impact on the process of economic development, and many countries today adhere to the economic formulations of Karl Marx. Keynesian school of thought. Keynesian's macroeconomics is named after one man J.M. Keynes, 1883 to 1946. His ideas were contained in his book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, which he published in 1939. Keynes was very critical of the capitalist economics. The Great Depression of 1929 to 1933 provided the basis for launching his attack on the classical position. Keynes rejected Sow's law of market and showed how total demand for goods and services could differ from a country's productive capacity. The business cycle and fluctuation in prices, production, and employment could not be reconciled with the classical idea and that the total demand for goods always matches productive capacity. Keynes also resolved against the classical approach, dichotomy, in which the physical and monetary aspects of the economy were treated in watertight compartments. Keynes attempted the integration of both the physical and monetary aspect in his analysis. According to Keynes, a meaningful discussion of aggregate level of output and employment is not complete without a complete theory of monetary economics. In a dynamic economy, expectations play a key role. Money serves as a substitute device to link the present to the future. Rather than the full employment equilibrium position in the economy, as enunciated by the classical school, Keynes stated that what is obtained in real life is unemployment equilibrium. This means that the economy always settles at less than full employment. Thus, the quantity theory of money of the classical school, which postulated a direct relationship between the money supply and the price level in an economy, may not always hold. This is because, given the present employment in the economy, increase in the money supply rather than leads to increase in prices will result in increase in output and employment. Keynesian macroeconomics concerns itself above all with the factors that determine demand. This is also a major difference with the classical theory. In the classical economics, more attention was focused on production, that is, to the supply side. In the classical way of thought, total demand adjusts to the supply, and in the case on theory, the opposite is the case. If there is inadequate demand, production falls because the level of expenditure is too low. This causes unemployment. This is where Keynes calls for government involvement in the economy to boost aggregate demand. Rather than advocating for minimum government intervention, Keynes calls for maximum government involvement in the economy. Keynes was also famous for his theory of multipliers. This is closely linked with the marginal propensity to consume, the multiple by which national income will change if an item of aggregate demand is changed. However, the value of the multiplier would depend upon the value of the marginal propensity to consume. Keynes is also remembered for introducing other terms like liquidity preference, liquidity trap, and marginal efficiency of capital into economic literature. His ideas and postulations were not entirely new. He owed some of them to the economists before him. The concept of marginal, which he used, could be traced to the neoclassicalists. And as far as the concept of multiplier is concerned, Keynes himself recognizes he is indebted to Mr. R.F. Kahn. Keynes contributed a lot to the development of economic thought. His reasoning proved very useful in both three-cycle theory and welfare economics. He also showed new light on the motive of holding money. He made a distinction between the three methods of holding money, that is, transactive, precautionary, and speculative motives. In post-Keynesian era, there's been prolific addition and refinement of the basic Keynesian idea. For instance, the concept of multiplier was extended by bringing in numerous variants of it. For example, the balanced budget multiplier, which sheds new light on fiscal policy. Most of these additions and refinements, however, owe their origin to the stimulation provided by Keynes' general theory, monetarist school. The foremost exponent of this school is the Nobel laureate, Professor Milton Friedman of the Chicago University. He reformulated the quantity theory of money. In his reformulation, Friedman asserted that money does matter. He regarded money as any durable commodity, and the demand for it depends on the services which it can render to the holder. He posited that wealth can be held in 5 different forms: money, bonds, equity, physical non-human goods, and human capital. The monetarists emphasized the role of money in explaining short-term changes in national income. They argued that the role of money has been neglected by the Keynesians. Friedman was able to demonstrate that changes in the money supply causes changes in the national income. Thus, monetarists believe that all recessions and depressions are caused by severe contraction of money and credit, while booms and inflation are the outcome of excessive increase in the money supply. While Keynes has argued that demand for money is a function of both the level of income and the rate of interest, the monetarists hold that the rate of interest play no part in determining the demand for money. The demand for money is the transactive demand for money, which is determined by the level of income. The monetarists also hold that monetary policy is superior to fiscal policy. This is a direct antithesis of the Keynesian school. Instruments of monetary policy include bank rate, open market operation, changes in reserve ratio, selective credit control. They hold that against fiscal policy, monetary policy possesses greater flexibility and it can be implemented rapidly. A major limitation to the monetary policy, however, is the long operation lag. Friedman himself admitted that the time lag involved is so large that contra-cyclical monetary policy might actually have a destabilizing effect on the economy. Current development in the field of economics. Today, 3 groups dominate the research headline: the neoclassical, the new Keynesians, and the new grouped theories. Note: the generous use of the word new, unlike producers of laundry detergent, economics stop short of using new and improved, but the subliminal message is the same. Neoclassical economics and real business cycle theory. The rational expectation critique was more than just a critique of Keynesian economics. It also offered its own interpretation of fluctuations. Instead of relying on imperfection in labor market, on the slow adjustment of wages and prices, and so on to explain fluctuations, Lucas argued macroeconomics should see how far they can go in explaining fluctuations as the effect of shocks in the competitive market with fully flexible prices and wages. This is the research agenda that has been pursued by the new classical. The intellectual leader is Edward Prescott, and the models he and his followers have developed are known as Real Business Cycle (RBC) models. These models assume that output is always at its natural level. Thus, all fluctuations in output are movement of the natural level of output, as opposed to movement away from the natural level of output. Where do these movements come from? The answer proposed by Prescott is technological progress. As new discoveries are made, productivity increases, leading to an increase in output. The increase in productivity leads to an increase in the wage, which makes it more attractive to work and thus leads workers to work more. Productivity increases therefore lead to increase in both output and employment, as we indeed observe in the real world. The RBC approach has been criticized on many fronts. Technological progress is the result of very many innovations, each of which takes a long time to diffuse. It is hard to see how this process could generate anything like the large short-run fluctuation in output that we observe in practice. It is also hard to think of recession at times of technological regress, times in which productivity and output both go down. Finally, as we have seen, there is a very strong evidence that changes in money, which have no effect on output in RBC models, in fact, have strong effect on the output in the real world. The RBC approach has been criticized on many fronts. Technological progress is the result of very many innovations, each of which takes a long time to diffuse. It is hard to see how this process could generate anything like the large short-term fluctuations in output that we observe in practice. It is also hard to think of recession at times of technological regress, times in which productivity and output both go down. Finally, as we have seen, there is very strong evidence that changes in money, which have no effect on output in RBC models, in fact, have strong effects on the real world. Thus, at this point, most economists do not believe that the RBC approach provides a convincing explanation of major fluctuations in output. The approach has nevertheless proved useful. It has drilled in the correct point that not all fluctuations in output are deviation of output from its natural level. At a more technical level, it has provided a number of new techniques for solving complex problems, which are widely used in research today. It is likely to evolve rather than disappear. Already, some recent RBC models have started introducing nominal rigidities, such as allowing for the effect of money on output. New Keynesian economy. The term New Keynesians denotes a loosely connected group of researchers who share a common belief that the synthesis that has emerged in response to the rational expectation critique is basically correct. But they also share the belief that much remains to be learned about the nature of the imperfection in different markets and about the implications of those imperfections for macroeconomic evolution. One line of research has focused on the determination of wages in the labor market. One influential researcher in this area has been George Akerlof from Berkeley, which has explored the roles of norms, the rules that develop in any organization, in this case the firm, to assess what is fair or unfair. This research has led him and others to explore issues previously left to research in sociology and psychology and to examine their macroeconomic implications. Another line of New Keynesian research has explored the role of imperfection in credit markets. Here, we have to assume that the effects of monetary policy work through interest rates and that firms and people can borrow freely at the quoted interest rate. In practice, most people and many firms can borrow only from banks, and banks often turn down potential borrowers despite their willingness to pay the posted interest rate. Why this happens and how it affects our view of how monetary policy works has been subject to much research, in particular by Bernanke of Princeton. Yet another direction of research in nominal rigidity, Fisher and Taylor have shown that with staggering of wage or price decisions, output can deviate from its natural level for a long time. This conclusion raises a number of issues. If staggering is indeed responsible, at least in part, for fluctuations, why don't wages setter, price setters synchronize decision? Why aren't prices and wages adjusted more often? Why aren't all prices and wages changed, say one of the first of each month? In tackling these issues, Akerlof and N. Gregory Mankiw from Harvard University have derived a surprising and important result, often referred to as the menu cost explanation of output fluctuations. Each wage or price setter is likely indifferent as to when and how often it changes its own wage or price for a retailer. Changing the prices on the shelf every day or every week does not make much difference to profit. Thus, even small cost of changing prices, such as those involved in the printing of a new menu, for example, may lead to infrequent and staggering price adjustment. In turn, this staggering leads to slow adjustment of the price level and thus to large aggregate output fluctuations in response to movement in aggregate demand. In short, decisions that do not matter much at the individual level lead to large aggregate effect, slow adjustment of the price level, and thus large effect of shift in aggregate demand on output. New growth theory. After being one of the most active topics of research in the 1960s, growth theory went into intellectual slump. Since the mid-1980s, however, growth theory has made a strong comeback. The set of new contributions goes under the name of New Growth Theory. Two economists, Robert Lucas, the same Lucas who spearheaded the rational expectation critique, and Paul Romer from Berkeley, have played an important role in defining the issues. When growth theory faded in late 1960s, two issues were left largely unresolved. The first was the determinants of technological progress. The second was the role of increasing return to scale, whether, say, doubling capital and labor may actually lead to less than a doubling of output. These are the two major issues on which new growth theory has concentrated. Clearly, these propositions leave a lot of rooms for disagreement. The major area of disagreement is in the length of the short run, the period of time over which aggregate demand affects output. At one extreme, real business cycle theories start from the assumption that output is always at its natural level. The short run is very short indeed. At the other, theories of hysteresis in unemployment imply that the effects of demand may be extremely long-lasting, that the short run may in fact be very long. The other area of disagreement is in the role of policy. While conceptual distinct, it is largely related to the first. Those who believe that output remains quickly to its natural level are typically willing to impose tight rules on both monetary and fiscal policies, from constant money growth to the requirement of a balanced budget. Those who believe that the adjustment is slow typically believe in the need for more flexible stabilization policies. Despite these disagreements, this core provides a framework in which to conduct and organize research. More important, it provides a framework to interpret events and discuss policies. Summary. In this study session, you have examined the main schools of economic thought: the mercantilists, the physiocrats, classical, Marxists, creationists, and the monetarists. While the focus of the classicalists was on free trade and minimum government intervention in the economy, the mercantilists argued against free trade and, with the Marxist economists, called for maximum government involvement in the economy. Also, like the classics, Keynes shifted attention from microeconomics analysis to macroeconomics. Monetarists emphasized the superiority of monetary policy to fiscal policy. As of recent times, three growth theories dominate the research headlines. These are the neoclassical, the neo-Keynesians, and the new growth theorists. This is the end of study session 9. Thanks for listening.